Welcome, everyone. I'm Diana Chester, the Vice President for the World Listening Project, joined here today by some other folks from the World Listening Project and some participants and our guest speaker for today, Andrew Skeoch. We're really excited to have Andrew speak, and I'm going to give a little bit of an intro for Andrew and then let him launch into his talk for today. Andrew's a professional wildlife sound recordist, an acoustic ecologist, and author of Deep Listening to Nature, which actually I have it right here. It's a pretty awesome book if you are interested in checking it out. It looks a lot like that. Ooh, my blurry filters on. Over the last 30 years, Andrew has documented the sounds of environments around the planet, and through his label Listening Earth, he's published over 100 recordings, allowing listeners to immerse themselves in wildlife soundscapes from a range of iconic habitats. Andrew's recordings have been heard in documentaries and installations and feature films, including Peter Gabriel's soundtrack to Rabbit Proof Fence. He's given presentations to audiences ranging from local communities and naturalist groups to university students. So today, Andrew will be in good company with our listeners here. And he's appeared at festivals including WOMAD Planet Talks, written for the next conversation, and presented radio features and keynote addresses, as well as a TEDx talk. Andrew is the president of the Australian Wildlife Sound Recording Group and is on the board of the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology, which is actually how we know each other. So, Andrew, I'm super excited to introduce you. Thanks so much for being here today, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Diana. And good day, everyone. I'm speaking from the traditional lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people, the Aboriginal peoples of Southeast Australia, and I'd like to acknowledge their custodianship and care for the land over so many generations. When I began sound recording, I was a bit of a nature kid growing up. I knew my birds, and when I began working with microphones, I was just fascinated with the diversity and beauty of natural sound. But reflecting back now, I realize that, well, as modern peoples, we don't come from a listening culture. I was carrying that lack and deficit of listening skills. I was making short recordings because my listening was similarly fragmented, and I was judging what was and wasn't an interesting subject. So I was hearing nature as a source of sound. I was a disconnected listener, I suppose, and I was taking nature as a sound resource that I was documenting. I wasn't hearing myself as a living participant in the soundscape. And as a listener, you can only be in the moment. Listening is in the moment. I was hearing nature in an objective way, as a place, an environment, a habitat for species, or something. Whereas nature is happening in that moment. It's dynamic, it's ever-changing, it's a process. So I was hearing nature as a noun, whereas in reality, it's a verb. And I also wasn't hearing the whole ecosystem. I was hearing individual voices. But it's the relationships and the interactions of those profound communicative patterns that have evolved over 500,000 years to facilitate the functioning of life that I'd like to focus on today. Because it's those communicative patterns that tell us of life. And I'd like to explore not so much listening to learn about nature as listening to learn from nature. If acoustic ecology is a study of the world through listening, I'd like to suggest that we think of it as a way of perceiving the wisdom of nature, hearing her voice as guide, mentor, and teacher. And if we're not a listening culture, then this way of hearing ourselves, as it's been described, we're the youngest species and hence have the most to learn. It's even more challenging to our identity, but in our current circumstances of growing crisis, I believe it offers an essential way forward. The recordings I'll be playing for you come from Australia, and Australian birdsong. I've traveled all around the world. It's been a great privilege to travel and record in different places. But I found that Australian birdsong is quite different to other parts of the world, especially the Northern Hemisphere. But this offers an insight into universal processes that actually I hear everywhere. It's as though while nature has a great diversity of sounds, it actually sings with one voice. And so today it's that one voice that I'd like us to focus on and hear, I'd like to talk about. So I want to start with a story of when I first began sound recording. And I'm just going to share screen now. And it's a story that comes from this place. It's about this place. This is Waratah Flat. It's a highland mountain forest in southeast Australia. It's a mix of tall eucalypts, alpine ash, mountain ash, along with sassafras, myrtle beech. These are ancient species that have been around for tens of millions of years. They represent a kind of ecosystem that existed before the dry eucalypt woodlands of Australia evolved. So it's an ancient place, and it just feels like it. To be in these misty, dense forests was just the most extraordinary experience for me when I was first beginning sound recording. And I'd like to play you one of those first sound recordings that I made. This is the dawn chorus at Waratah Flat. And you'll hear that this is quite different to a Northern Hemisphere dawn chorus. But here we go. So mix of species, eastern yellow robins, golden whistlers, Bassian thrush at the end there, white-naped honeyeaters, and some kookaburras way off in the distance. One of the reasons that we went to this place was an animal called the yellow-bellied glider, quite endangered. And these forests have been subject to clear fell logging for a long period of time. So we wanted to document them as in support of efforts, conservation efforts to protect these forests. And yellow-bellied gliders are one of those key species. I was speaking with an ecologist at the time, a friend of mine, who told me about these animals and said that they're nectar feeding. They feed on the exudate of nectar from trees, and they carve really sharp claws, and they carve grooves in the tree to extract the nectar. So they'll climb up these trees, and they're a possum. They're related to possums. They're around about cat size, and they're a lovely furry tail. And what they do is they climb up to the top of the tree and then they launch themselves off and they open up their limbs. They've got a membrane of skin between the front and back limbs, and they glide down through the forest to land on a tree and then climb up and feed on that. And as they do so, they give this wonderful, grisly, growly call, which my ecologist friend said is it's like halfway between the biggest tummy rumble that you've ever had and the sound of a cat being swung around your head by its tail, which is, I think, is a great description. Anyway, at Waratah Flat, I went out in the evenings to try and record yellow bellies, and it took me a couple of evenings before I got onto one. And here you'll hear a bubuk owl in the background and a yellow belly giving soft moans as it climbs up the tree. You hear a little bit of scrabbling on the bark, and then it launches itself off and gives that lovely growly call. he goes. Um, that was recorded in 1994, and it was really an inspiring occasion for me as a young sound recordist. I was just so enamored and fascinated by what I was recording. In 2019, we had massive bushfires in southern and eastern Australia, what we now know as the Black Summer. About a quarter of Australia's forest habitats burned in the most extraordinary ways. It really was a cataclysmic event. And I knew that Waratah Flat probably was burnt around about Christmas of 2019. By the new year of 2020, the world really was watching images of the nearby town of Malakuta being evacuated under apocalyptic circumstances, ash clouds, and so on. This was Waratah Flat. Oh, hang on a sec. I'll just quickly show you this. This is the species list that I recorded in 1994. I was there for about a week. So that's most of them are birds: the ewings, tree frog, the crinia, the amphibians, and then the three possums, native mammals. So this gives you a sense of those fires in 2019, 2020. This is a satellite image. It covers an area of around about 50 kilometers. It's by 30, it's 1,500 square kilometers. And just looking at some of that fire ground, I mean, it's just a sea of flame. How anything could survive that, it just felt like, temperatures up to 1,000 degrees. It really was. It was just an appalling event. And for years afterwards, I felt that I just didn't have the heart really to go back to any of these places that had meant so much to me. As a beginning sound recordist, I was very fond of them, and the idea that they'd just been completely immolated and destroyed really, I found heartbreaking. But about a year ago, I was in the area. I had a weekend free, and I felt that as a sound recordist, I kind of had a duty to go back and document these places. And so I travelled up to Waratah Flat for a couple of days. So this is Waratah Flat in 1994, over 30 years ago. This is Waratah Flat now. And you can see that most of these trees are burnt. There's a little bit of regrowth on some of the smaller trees. Some of them might have escaped in small pockets, but basically the whole place just looks absolutely devastated. So I wasn't expecting much the next morning when I put my microphones out, which I did around about 4 a.m. in the morning and recorded right through for a couple of hours. But this is the recording that I got. In 1994, where the river crossing was near the campground, I recorded this chorus of Ewing's tree frogs. A year ago, I went down to the same place, that same river crossing, and recorded a similar community of Ewing's tree frogs. Not only that, but, and I hope you can see my cursor here, Here at the end, that's the sound I'd really like you to listen to. That is unmistakably a yellow-bellied glider. How they'd survived that fire and were still in the landscape now, I have no idea. It just seems a miracle to me. So here's that species list from 1994. Even though I was only there for 2 days and I was listening and detecting most of these species by voice, and of all those species in 1994, nearly all of them were still present. The only ones that weren't, the Satin flycatcher is a fairly mobile species. It can turn up and one time and not be there at others, so it wasn't all that surprising. The two robins didn't seem to be present, the rose and pink robin. They're very much wet country specialists. But the fact that all these species are still there 5 years after that apocalyptic fire just is an extraordinary thing. But wait, here are the additional species that were present last year that were not present in 1994. It's about a 50% increase in overall avian biodiversity. And as I made this list, I'm just thinking, am I imagining things here? This just seems extraordinary that all these extra species are here that weren't here originally. But I spoke to a friend of mine, an ecologist, who said we've seen the same thing in plant biodiversity. We've done assessment plots, fire assessment plots, and found the same result, 50% increase in plant biodiversity after the fires. They don't have any measures for insects, but she said anecdotal, everything was just crawling in bugs, which probably explains why the birds are there. And a lot of these birds are they're more open, dry country birds, like the mistletoe bird, fairy martins, and the dusky wood swallows are aerial feeders. So they need a little bit of open structure in the forest. Some of the others, black-faced cuckoo shrike, leaden flycatchers, these are more open woodland birds, Rufous whistler. However, that might explain things from an ecological point of view, that different species come in because of different opportunities. But I've got another perspective on this that makes a little bit more sense to me, and that is that as humans, we have a healing mechanism. If we injure ourselves, our body goes into a healing response of red blood cells, white blood cells, scar tissue, immune system, and so on. This is kind of the same thing in an ecosystem, that when it's subjected to a cataclysmic change like this, that species pour in and, to establish a new ecology. Now, the ecology that might emerge from this, it may not be what was there in 1994. It may not be that primordial, temperate, wet forest, rainforest. It might be something different, but nevertheless, nature has these ways of healing itself after a cataclysmic change. So I realized that what I'm hearing is something that is not visually apparent. Looking at that landscape, it just looked pretty devastated. But I'm hearing a different story. I'm hearing a story of resilience and renewal. And so I'm actually hearing a process in the natural system. And what I'd like to do now is explore that way of listening to process, and of hearing relationships, hearing interactions, and how everything fits together as an ecological sound system, communicative system. And thinking about birds because, hey, they're my favorite. And they're just so sophisticated and fascinating in how they communicate, use sound to negotiate their world. Um, if you think of sound in aggregate, there are two phenomena in the bird world that are really apparent. One of them is the dawn chorus, which is heard all around the world. And similarly, universally found is what are called mixed species foraging flocks. So I'd like to talk about these two because they illustrate particularly interesting principles. So firstly, the dawn chorus. It is that festival of birdsong that you hear in the dawn before daybreak. It's the first hour of dawn. By the time the sun hits the horizon, it's largely finished, and you're into the diurnal daytime singing behavior of birds. But at dawn, they create this very dense and layered and sophisticated communicative interaction, which we call the dawn chorus. But to get a sense of why the dawn chorus has evolved, because you've got to remember you hear dawn choruses all around the world. It's no accident that birds sing at dawn. They're doing something special. It's largely songbirds that participate in the dawn chorus, and in temperate regions, it's largely a breeding season phenomenon. So that tells you it's something to do with breeding, but it still doesn't tell you exactly what birds are doing. So to get a sense of that, I'd like to talk about a few species of Australian birds and what they do in the dawn that is unique, that you do not hear them do throughout the rest of the day or possibly throughout the rest of the year. And the first of these, this is a white-eared honeyeater, and it is a wonderful exponent of a behavior called countersinging. Countersinging is where two neighboring birds of the same kind, rather than singing randomly or trying to outdo each other or trying to sing over the top of each other, they take turns. They alternate their singing backwards and forwards, one to another. So here is the dawn singing of a pair of white-eared honeyeaters. It's a particular aspect of their repertoire. It's this song phrase, which once again, you will hear more widely throughout the day, but it's the only one that they use in the dawn chorus. And you can hear these two birds alternating in stereo. You should hear them in either channel. So that's a white-eared honeyeater. This is a white-fronted honeyeater, and it does things slightly differently. They have a very extensive repertoire of sounds, which I think of as this wonderful collection of mechanical sound effects. It's just so varied. And in the dawn, neighboring birds will interact with each other, rapid firing different elements of their repertoire backwards and forwards, creating a really tightly interlocked, almost telepathic duet. These are inland birds, dry country birds, and to be in the outback in that half light before sunrise and to hear these birds do this is just one of the most magical things. Once again, should be able to hear birds in either channel. Hmm. And next, this is a spiny-cheeked honeyeater, which I'm very fond of this species because it was hearing them at the very beginning of when I was first sound recording that really inspired me of just to the beauty of the natural sound world. These birds do things slightly differently. Again, they have a specific dawn song that you do not hear throughout the rest of the day. And whilst they have a somewhat unpleasant call during the day, it's loud and obnoxious and it's kind of whiny and wheezy and wheedly but at dawn they have this sublimely beautiful song. And it was hearing one of them, as I said, over 30 years ago, that I just thought, this is just so beautiful. I'm just going to play you one song phrase. You have to imagine a whole landscape full of these birds giving this song. It's a steady piping series of piping notes and very slightly descending. It's beautiful. But what's extraordinary about these birds is that as you travel around the countryside, they have different dawn songs in each population of birds. So that was a bird from Western New South Wales. In central New South Wales, and then going up to the northwest corner of New South Wales. You can hear that all these birds are different, tracking across about 300 kilometres towards the coast around Cunnamulla. And now down into southern Australia, the west of Victoria. And you can hear that the birds in this area have quite a different song structure. The first part of it sounds a little bit like the Western New South Wales birds, but then they add on these extra series of notes. Just across the border in South Australia, so only about 200 kilometres away, quite different again. And you can hear that rough texture and that almost a little click at the very beginning of each of those notes. And then right across to Western Australia, to the salmon gum woodlands in that part of the world. Now, I just want to show you something interesting here. This is a bird that I recorded north of Bourke, so it's northern New South Wales, not far from that Cunnamulla example. And you'll hear that it's got a very, very different vocal quality about it. Whoa, something just crashed. Bear with me a moment. Uh, so am I still screen sharing, Diana?
No, we've lost that. We just have you up at the moment.
Okay, let's jump back in again. It's
There you go.
unusual. I've never seen that happen before. All right, here's that bird just north of Bourke, and you can hear that buzzy texture in its song. About 15 kilometers away, and 25 years ago, I recorded this bird. You can hear a similar but quite noticeably different song, similar texture, the buzzy texture, but quite a different structure to it. Um, about 18 months ago, I traveled back to the location where I recorded this bird, and I got this recording. So what I'm hearing here is that over really small distances of about 15 kilometers, the song can be noticeably different. But over periods of time, several decades, there's an amazing fidelity of song that once a population of birds has a song, they transmit that by learning from one generation to another and maintain their song. So what I'm hearing going on here is a combination of things. Firstly, those white-eared honeyeaters, by alternating their songs, and the white-fronted honeyeaters, they've got to be listening to each other. You know, we think of the dawn chorus as being birds singing at dawn, but actually they're listening as much as they're singing. And when they're listening, they're acknowledging their neighbours and they're fitting in with their neighbours. They're alternating their songs with their neighbours in sometimes very sophisticated ways. These spiny cheeks are doing something similar, but they're doing something else as well. When a population of birds has the same song, they have the same sonic identity. And when you have the same sonic identity, a population of birds can become a community of birds. So I'm hearing these spiny-cheeked honeyeaters, which are largely resident in the landscape. They will move around a little bit in response to opportunities, but they're largely resident. And so a population of birds, when they're singing at dawn in this way, they're affirming their belonging to that local community. And if an individual bird moves to a neighbouring community, dispersal, which they will do, then they would learn the new song of the community that they've moved into. It's like learning the local dialect, learning the local lingo, we might say. So I'm hearing birds both acknowledging their presence in the landscape, their home ranges where they live, and how that relates to neighbouring birds, but also the communities of their own species, their own kin that they belong to. So all this brings me to the grey shrike thrush, which is a beautiful bird, soft grey plumage, and it has the most gorgeous song, very rich and tonal. We have them living around our place, and just listening to them, I can hear that they have maybe about 24 different songs in their repertoire, which you become familiar with. And I'm hearing them singing every dawn in the breeding season and thinking they're doing something interesting. I just couldn't quite put my finger on exactly what it was. So for a week, I put my microphones out to record these birds. And I want to talk you through just one of those dawn choruses, because what these grey shrike thrushes are doing is not only everything that the honeyeaters are doing, but they're doing something else, which is really quite extraordinary and very sophisticated. So the dawn chorus began with magpies singing in the dark. And incidentally, this is another thing about dawn choruses, that when you become familiar with a particular place, you hear that each species has its place in the dawn chorus. They begin singing at different times. Some are early singers, some establish the dawn chorus, some in the middle, some towards the end. So magpies began. Then the kookaburras kicked up, and that generally tells you that the dawn chorus is now starting in earnest. Birds like fairy wrens, robins, fantails are very early singers. Then the honeyeaters began. The honeyeaters, it's a unique thing to hear honeyeaters in this country, that you don't really hear it anywhere else in the world, but that lovely chippy kind of dawn chorus that these various honeyeaters that I've played you so far have demonstrated. But it was more towards the middle of the dawn chorus that the first shrike thrush began singing, and it was the bird that lives around our house. And from its repertoire of about 24 or so song phrases, it chose one specific song phrase and it just sung it out once. And then it waited for a response, and it didn't get one. So about 20 seconds later, it sung the same song phrase again and waited. And again. It was about 2 minutes before the neighbouring shrike thrush, about 100 metres down the hill from us, began singing. And when the two birds began, they fell into this pattern of counter singing backwards and forwards with each other. But what really what really amazed me was that the neighbouring bird, from its repertoire of 24 or so calls, song phrases, it chose exactly the same song phrase as our bird. A little while later, our neighbouring bird, that they'd been singing like this, and actually other shrike thrushes that joined in, they were all singing the same song. And then the neighbouring bird sung a completely different song phrase, hadn't been heard before. Immediately, our bird picked up on the new song phrase, and within about a minute, every bird in the district was singing this second new song. Another 10 or 15 minutes or so, and some interesting things happened. Our bird tried to initiate a new song, but a magpie sung at exactly the same moment and it wasn't heard. So it tried a second time, but the magpie sang again. And after that, it gave up and it went back to the song that everyone else was singing. But by this stage, the whole dawn chorus was ebbing away, and shrike thrushes were amongst the last ones left singing, and you could hear them way out across the landscape, way off in the distance. And from there, I could hear that a new song had been introduced, and it was like a Mexican wave. It just rippled through until everybody had transitioned across to this third new song phrase. So this is a really sophisticated singing behavior. They're not only counter singing the way other birds do, they're not only singing with common repertoire to affirm their place in a community of their own species, but they're altering their songs as they go along in response to each other. And that means that they have to be making decisions. If you think about it from each bird's point of view, are they going to follow the song that everyone else is doing? They have the option of singing a new song. If they sing a new song and it's picked up, great. But what happens if it isn't? How long do you try before you go back to the established song? If you hear a new song, how long do you stay with the old one before you transition across to the new song? So there are all these decisions that they're making, which makes us aware of the avian singing mind. And we know that the avian brain, when birds sing, they get little floods of happy chemicals in their brain. In other words, they enjoy singing. It gives them pleasure. So what I'm hearing in all of these examples of birds singing in the dawn chorus is that birds are negotiating their most important relationships in life with their neighbors, with their community. And they're doing it, in the case of these shrike thrushes, in a way that is sentient, intelligent, and neurologically stimulating. They're enjoying this process of pass the song, so to speak. There's one more relationship which I hear in the dawn chorus, and it took me a little while to pick up on it. Once again, it goes back to those white-eared honeyeaters that I began with. And it's these little calls in here. They're really quiet. You can only hear them when you're very close to the bird. I call them a bubble song. These sort of tuk, 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 tuk calls. And when I first heard them, I thought, well, is that an accident? Is the bird actually intending to do that? Or is it just kind of like mumbling away to itself or something? No, it's a very intentional communication. It's not intended for that wider community of birds to which they belong. It's intended from the male bird singing to the female bird who is roosted in the same bush as he is. This is their morning connection, their morning wake up bonding call. Have a listen to it. And a couple of little bill clicks there. And if you just listen really closely, you can just hear the female flying off at the end there, which is why you got so animated. So what I'm hearing the dawn chorus as is a negotiation of relationships. Birds are negotiating their most essential relationships in life. But what I realized is that the dawn chorus is not only It's a beautiful phenomenon to listen to. It's really sophisticated and just gorgeous to listen to. And as I said, you hear it all around the world. But I realized birds have evolved a way of negotiating their relationships, which does not do harm. And you think about it, they could be contentious, but they're not. They're singing. They've worked out sort of ritualistic, formulaic ways of singing to negotiate their relationships. And for a while, I thought, wow, that's an extraordinary way of hearing the dawn chorus. And then I realized it's not only birds that do this. And it was the wallabies that live in our bushland that really tuned me into this. Wallabies, a bit like kangaroos. Kangaroos are mob animals. Wallabies are much more solitary. And they've kind of got a quiet demeanor, I always think. So I was really surprised one morning to come across two males having what I'd have to call a dinky-die biffo. They were really going for it. But I'd like you to watch very closely what these two animals are doing. Firstly, they're facing each other, which means that their vulnerable underbelly is exposed to the sharp hind claws. And then they're wrapping their forearms around each other's shoulders, which limits their movement and locks them into a configuration. And from there, they're trying to knock the other animal off balance. And when they succeed in doing so, they wait for the other animal to stand up. They re-engage before carrying on. And if they get tired, they might take a break for a minute or two until eventually one animal will move off, not to return. And this is a really physical process. You can see how tired this animal is. He's really puffed. And yet, when he hops away, he's uninjured. So this kind of behavior is called an agonistic behavior, and it's found throughout the animal kingdom. Uh, Different animals do it in different ways. Wallabies have this behavior. It's very similar to, if you've ever seen videos of boxing kangaroos. Rabbits and hares have a similar kind of put up your dukes kind of behavior. But they're found in various ways right throughout the animal kingdom. And in the case of birds, rather than physical interactions, they've evolved this way of vocally communicating and negotiating their relationships. And so I realized all those mornings that I'm getting up out of nice warm bedding to go and record dawn choruses, I'm hearing something really profound. I'm hearing something that has evolved to facilitate life. And it got me thinking about, so what's life doing? What am I hearing here? What's going on? What's underneath this? And I think this statement really sums everything up about what is happening in the natural world. Nature generates the essential conditions that are supportive of life. And when you get your head around this statement, it explains a lot of things. It's actually far more it's more challenging to understand than it first appears. For instance, the word generates. You know, we tend to think of in our linear way of thinking, we think about causes and effects. But in nature, it's the essential conditions that generate the outcome. Once you get the essential conditions right, they are supportive of life. So if you think about other things like, you know, the way the weather happens, it's the conditions that set up our weather systems. And it's the same in ecosystems, those essential conditions that nature generates that are supportive of life. So what are those essential conditions? Speaking to psychologists, they talk about three essential conditions that we as humans require to develop well, to thrive in life. And they are safety, security, and to be seen and heard. Nature provides these same three essential conditions. So safety, nature minimizes the costs of competition through these agonistic behaviors, through these interactions, whether it's the dawn chorus or these physical behaviors. And it does so because the costs of competition, of open competition, are pretty severe. Firstly, there's the possibility of physical injury. They're stressful. It takes a lot of energy to compete. It might be a distraction from far more important things like foraging, breeding, whatever. And at the end of the day, it's just inefficient. It's counterproductive. And so animals, organisms that have evolved ways of certainly they need to resolve their contentions, but doing it in a way that does not cause these costs or does not lead to these kind of potential losses, they're the ones that survive. And so, what nature is telling us is that direct competition is inefficient and it may well be hurtful. And so, we end up with all these different formal behaviors to resolve contentions. So, whilst we think of competition as being a virtue, nature tells us no, it is to be avoided wherever it can be and the costs minimized. Security. If we think about security in nature, we might think of stability or continuance or stability of some kind, but nature's dynamic. You know, the weather is changing, the seasons are changing, different circumstances, different animal populations rising and falling. Everything is changing all the time. So rather than a sort of a stasis, we need to think of nature being a dynamic system and homeostasis being it's kind of an oscillation between sustainable limits. So a dynamic system of homeostasis is what ecosystems come to rather than anything static. And they do so through a combination of biodiversity, interdependence of different organisms, and very often cooperative relationships. And once again, coming back to sound, in the bird world, it is one of those cooperative interactions that you hear all around the world in mixed species foraging flocks. In the tropics, they're absolutely spectacular, really something to behold. And my Indian bird watching friends call these bird waves. But we get them in this country too. And here is an example of one. It involves buff-rumped thornbills, tree creepers, fairy wrens, weebills, scarlet robin, white-naped honeyeater, and there always seems to be a fantail involved in these little aggregations, which are entirely held together and facilitated by all the contact calling of these various species. Now, I'm aware that time is moving on, so I'm going to sprint for the finishing line here. So this is an example of an essential cooperation that is found in the bird world. It facilitates foraging more efficiently and, most importantly, safely. And it's found all around the world, these foraging flocks. And when you think about how important foraging is, you realize just how significant these foraging flocks are. So I'm hearing two principles here. Firstly, cooperation. Cooperation works. Cooperation requires a certain investment, loss of autonomy perhaps, but the benefits of cooperating are so valuable. But the thing about it is, you think about those foraging flocks, they're mixed species foraging flocks. All of these birds forage in completely different ways, and yet they come together as one aggregation to forage efficiently and safely. And so I feel that lesson for us is that cooperation works. We're a very cooperative species. We know this very well, but we're not very good at cooperating across our human differences, our cultural differences of language and religions and histories and traditions and ideologies and ways that we think about how the world should work. But it's cooperating across our human difference that is going to give us the most benefit. In the same way that in ecosystems, cooperation across sometimes vastly different organisms across the tree of life gives the foundational conditions for whole ecosystems. You think of the relationship between algae and coral polyps, for instance, that informs marine tropical coral reefs. So cooperation across difference gives us the most beneficial outcomes. So to be seen and heard, this one puzzled me for a little while, but it was actually this bird. It's a Teresian crow that really made me aware. I was in the outback, I was recording, and I'd often find the crows would come around and check out my recording rig. And on many mornings, I could hear them on my recordings. But on one morning, a bird did something unexpected and really quite extraordinary. It flew in, gave half a dozen calls, and I could hear it hop down. I could hear it hopping along the ground until it was right underneath my recording rig. And then it began vocalizing. When I first listened to this recording, I was absolutely amazed because up to that point, I'd been thinking in terms of identifying species by voice and their vocal behaviors and behavioral associations of different calls. This was the first moment that I realized I'm listening to another mind. And it's a mind that lives in the same world that we do. It lives in it in a different way, but it's not so different that we can't empathize with it. And empathy is a really important capacity that humans have. When we extend empathy to others, it gives us a true knowing of another person beyond what is said, beyond their language, beyond their background. It gives you a really an essential knowing. And that knowing is the basis or the beginning of care and concern for another person. So to extend our empathic listening to nature is the beginning of recognizing the sentience of other creatures and their right to share this world with us. And empathy, far more than anthropomorphizing, it's actually a natural capacity that we have along with instinct and intuition. It's that side of our brain that connects us with the living world in a way that our intellect and our rationality disconnects us. So it's really important. This crow taught me that as well as being fascinated with the world and being curious about it, we also need to listen with the heart. We need to bring all of ourselves to listening to the world around us. So coming back to being seen and heard, to be seen and heard for us as humans is to feel acknowledged, to feel recognized. It's absolutely vital. It's one of those three conditions that we need to thrive in the world. But it's all about relationship. And when you think about relationship in nature, every organism in the natural world, it has a role. Even if it's not in direct relationship with others, it performs functional roles within an ecology. And so the question for me becomes, what is our species' role? Because we don't think that we've got one. We think that nature is just a thing for us it's a resource for us to take from. It's like when I was first sound recording, I thought that it was a sound resource that I was recording. What is our role? And for Indigenous people, they talk about listening to country a lot of the time. That's what I hear them saying. And I don't think it's a poetic phrase. I think they mean it literally, that you actually listen to nature because nature will tell you how to live. And in all of these things that I'm talking to you about, I feel as though nature, when we're listening to the natural sound world, we're hearing nature telling us how to live. So rather than thinking about this in any philosophical sense, perhaps we can think about it in terms of biomimicry, that we're listening to nature as a source of evolutionary wisdom about how natural systems can thrive. And whether that's a natural system of an ecology or whether that's a natural system of ourselves as human beings, it's the same thing and the same essential conditions pertain. So in finding our relationship with nature, listening is essential. listening is the magic capacity that we have to tune into the natural world and hear what's going on and to hear our place within it. And from that, find our right relationship with the living world. So very briefly to summarize, what I call deep listening, just boil it down to a couple of suggestions. Firstly, feel welcomed by country. When you go out into the bush, um, feel your presence, feel life around you. Life is noticing you the same way as you are noticing and becoming aware of what's around you. And feel that sense of belonging, that sense of kinship, that sense that you are a living creature in the natural surroundings. Feel that welcome. It's very rare that you don't get it. Next, extend your senses. Listening, obviously, you're familiar with that, but also all your other senses. Be curious. Use that intellect, that rational mind. What species am I hearing here? What's it doing? What's going on here? But also cultivate that other side of your brain, that intuitive, instinctive, empathic listening. And from all of that, the more experience you have, the more time and the more respect that you extend to nature, you allow yourself to be moved by what you hear, allow yourself to be informed, to be influenced by what you hear. It'll change you. Time in nature will change you. It's not just about connecting, it's about becoming a more it's becoming a citizen of this planet, if I could put it that way. You become more a natural person. So I'm going to finish off there. Just very, very quickly, I'll mention the Australian Wildlife Sound Recording Group, of which I'm a member. This is a little bit different to Acoustic Ecology in the sense that these people are interested in wildlife sound recording. We're a bit of we're a lovely mob. So you're welcome to join us. We publish an audio journal, which is now on podcast apps as well. And yeah, there's my book. All righty. I overshot.
Thanks, Andrew. That was awesome.